Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Kuf Zayin. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the last statement of yesterday's daf, Amar Rav. It's a very interesting statement to end with. Notel adam shtei yadav shacharit. You can wash your hands in the morning, u'ma'neh lehem kol hayom kulo, and stipulate that this is going to cover you for the entire day. This is in fact quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, although the Ramah writes it with a bit of a caveat and says we're only talking about if you do it for something else, not for food. Like if you wash your hands in the morning, okay, notice it actually says shacharit. The Bach says only shacharit, only when you wash first thing in the morning, not like later in the day, and this will cover you for later. He says, but you can't wash for eating and have it cover you later, which some people think means because they assume you mean you're washing for eating now and you're not actually eating anything, and that's a problem. But if you wash for some other reason, you actually could. Some people think that it just for some reason, Rav thinks, or for some reason the Ramah says, the Psak and the Ashkenazi part of the Shulchan Aruch, like the comments of the Ashkenaz Posek, the Ramah on the comments on the Shulchan Aruch says basically that, perhaps he's saying it again, two interpretations. It only works if you're washing your hands for something else, not if you're washing your hands for food. Even if you're planning to eat right away, that can't cover you for later, which is a little hard to understand. Either which way, we don't really do this, okay? And we're going to see today a little bit of possible pushback on this. It would be nice if we could do this, but we don't generally permit this unless it's some sort of situation where you can't avoid, like you're not going to be with water, and now you are, but then you would eat, and then you would have in mind that it would continue. And you also have to keep in mind that this is covering you, and that it's both stipulate at the beginning and not kind of forget about it throughout the day, which we forget things all the time. It would be hard to keep being minded to this, okay? Because then you have to make sure your hands don't touch things, they don't get dirty, they don't get impure, etc. Okay, anyway, very interesting statement. Lots of things one could, lots of places this statement was taken. Amar lahu Rabbi Avina libnei Pakta de Aravot. There were people who lived in this valley where a lot of Aravot grew. Kegon Achun, and Rabbi Avina said to them, like you, you don't have a lot of water. You can wash your hands in the morning, and it will cover you for the whole day. Some people inferred from this story, and that's what I said before, maybe in extant circumstances where you have no choice, we can allow this, but in general not. And this would disagree with Rav, because Rav seemed to say anyone can do this. And some people say, and some people thought that this was permitted to them, but really it could be permitted to anybody, and this actually coincides with what Rav says. Amar Rav Papa. Now Rav Papa is going to talk about a different situation. Hi, Arita Didalai. This is where you have a body of water, a natural body of water, where they would take out with a pail, take pail by pail water, dump it right into a ditch. From there, it would be an irrigation channel, basically. So they would be pouring the water from this body of water that theoretically is like a mikvah. Put it in a cup once you in a pail. Once you take water in a vessel, it's already not mikvah waters, and then dump it into a channel. Now the question is, now the water in the channel is kind of streaming. Can you wash your hands in that water channel as if like you're pouring water on your hands? Okay, not as a mikvah, because it's definitely not a mikvah. It was mayim she'uvim already, with water taken in a vessel, which is not good. But he says, the arita didalai, that means this channel, this ditch, irrigation channel that comes from a pail, eino tzli mimenu liyadayim. You can't use this for washing. We're going to get into today. It's going to be a very practical halacha about nitilat yadayim. Well, you can't do that. Delo atu makoch gavra. Needs to come from the power of a human. Okay? A person needs to actually wash their hands, pour the water on their hands. Here the water is just streaming. There's no human action, even though there was a human who poured the bucket, but at this point it's not really human action washing your hands. But if you're right near where the pail is, and then the water is pouring on your hands really straight from the pail, then you can use that for nitilat yadayim. So we see this element of needing a human interaction here. The human is pouring the water. This is why, for example, if you turn on a faucet, let's say you don't have a cup. So first of all, we're going to talk about the importance of having a vessel. And number two, there's the issue, which is that water isn't coming from human interaction. Now, some people claim that when you open the sink, there's human interaction. So maybe you could resolve it by turning on the faucet. The problem is you can't really resolve the issue of having a vessel, which we're going to see is an important element. The ibezia davla bekonis mashke. Now they said, however, if there's a huge hole in it, okay, a hole that really connects with what's going to be called this, that you can, if you would put it down, a lot of water would come into the bucket through the hole. So that's konis mashke, and it's a big enough hole that a lot of water will come in. So now, when you pick up the pail, you put the pail in the water, and then you start pouring it into the ditch. At the same time, water's dripping out, going back into the body of water, and at the same time also going into the channel. That basically connects all those waters to each other, and that's how we use mikvahs in general. We sometimes do have water that was collected in a vessel, but it's attached to the natural water. So as long as they're attached, which through this hole in the pail, you could actually view them as attached, then mitabel be et hayadayim, you could actually dip your hands in the water in the irrigation channel because it's viewed as a connection to the mikvah. And then not by netilat yadayim, but by tvilat yadayim, as we saw yesterday, the dunking of your hands. But Amar Rava said, Kli shenikeh b'konis mashke, ein notzlim mimenu liyadayim. Now we were already talking about this big hole. Well, you actually can't use a vessel because you need a vessel for washing netilat yadayim. If it has a big hole in it, well, then you can't use it for netilat yadayim. You need a whole vessel, not a broken one. Right, not one with a hole. Amar Rava, Kli she'ein bo rivi'it, ein notzlim mimenu yadayim. Rava also said, if it doesn't have a quarter log of water, you can't use it for washing. To which the Gemara asks, Ini, is that really true? V'ha'amar Rava, didn't Rava say, Kli she'en machzik revi'it, ein notlim mehem liyadayim? Now he said a kli that doesn't hold a revi'it. That doesn't mean it has a revi'it of water in it. It has to be a kli that theoretically could hold a quarter log, but not necessarily that it has to hold a quarter log. So how could Rava have said it needs a quarter log and at the same time say it needs to be able to hold a quarter of a log? Well, ha-machzik afagav delepe, right? That sounds like the second statement of Rava sounds like as long as it has if it could hold a revi'it, even though it's not actually holding a revi'it right now. So the Gemara answers, lo kasha, this is not difficult, halachad, halatrei. It's a very strange answer. For one person or two people, okay, what does that mean? Well, for one person, it's going to be the opposite of what you might think. For one person, it has to actually hold a revi'it. But for two people, and what they mean by two, they mean for the second person. If you fill up a cup for two people, it has to hold a revi'it. But by the time you get to the second person, it won't have a revi'it anymore. And then it was a cup that theoretically could have held, and in fact did hold a revi'it, but right now it doesn't have it anymore, and that's still valid. As long as it could have held a revi'it, and actually did, because this is what the Gemara is going to call in a minute or two, shiarei tahara. It's left over from something that was used for tahara purposes, meaning when you filled it up for the first person, it had a quarter log. Then when it got to the second person, it didn't anymore, but it's left over from something that was valid in the beginning. So now they say, ditnan, as it says in a Mishnah, it says Tanya, but it should be a Mishnah, me revi'it notlim liyadayim le'echav afilu lishnayim. So now it says a quarter log can be used for washing hands, for one and even for two people. And Amar le Rav Sheshet Lame, okay, so that's basically what we just saw, that it's enough for it to be for two people, you need a revi'it, so even though by the time it gets to the second person, you won't actually have a revi'it anymore. Amar le Rav Sheshet Lame, Rav Sheshet said to Amemar, kapditu amana, are you careful to have a vessel? Do you have to have a vessel? Amar le in, he said, yes, you definitely have to have a vessel to wash the tila yadayim. Achazuta, does it have to have the right color? Meaning, let's say some ink spilled into it. If it turns black, right, then it's no good. But if it still looks white or clear, then it's fine. Amar le'in, he said, yes, it has to be the right color, like water. Ashiura, does it need a requisite amount? Amar le'in, he said, yes, like we said, it needs to have a revi. But Ika de Amre, some people say that Amemar answered him, Hachi Amar le, he said, Amana v'achazuta kaptina, and you need a vessel, and you need it to look the right color. But ashiura lo kaptina, but you don't need the right amount. You don't need any requisite amount. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah that we just quoted, me revi notzlim liyadayim le'chava filu l'shnayim. Says you need a quarter log for one and even for two. It sounds like you don't need any requisite amount. Vilohi, but this is not accurate. Shane hatam mishum tekaati mishearei tahara. And I told you we get to this. That Mishnah is different because that Mishnah means from the beginning, though, there was a revi'it, and you're using leftovers of that. That's going to be okay. But it's not okay, it's not okay if you don't start with a revi'it. So they say, Velohi, right, that's different, and therefore you can't learn from there that you don't need any sort of requisite amount, and therefore it seems like they're going by the first version, which said you need a requisite amount. Adkin Rav Yaakov in Nahar Pakod, not Labat Raviata. Rav Yaakov in Nahar Pakod said, he established, this is a washing cup, and this is the size that you need. Rashi says Natla is made of glass. He made a glass one. Okay, that wouldn't go in my house very well. Always my Natlas always break. But right, he said a glass one that was this size, and he showed everybody this is the requisite amount you need. And Atkim Rav Ashi Behutzal Kuza Bat Raviati. He used a kuza, which is usually known as an earthenware vessel. That was also a ravit. Okay, so they both had these vessels that were a ravit that they tried to show everybody this is the way you should be washing with this minimum amount. Okay, a quarter log is not so much, by the way. It's more like a kiddush cup size. Ve'amar Rava, megufat chavit shetikna. Rava also said, Rava has a lot to say about netilat yadayim. He says the cover of a barrel, if you hollow it out, because it has sides to it, if you hollow it out, you can use that because a barrel is used for liquids. We're going to see here, has to be a vessel that was meant for liquids. So you can hollow out the cover and use it. No limi menu liyadayim. You could use it for netilat yadayim, and here's a braita to prove this. Tanya nami hachi, braita to support Rava. Megufat chavit shetikna no limi menu liyadayim. Okay, here you have the exact same thing Rava just said. Now the Gemara is going to, the braita that we just quoted, that was going to bring some other cases. Chemet ukfisha shetiknan. If you took a chemet, which is a leather, these are leather flasks. Okay, some people think kfish is made of something else, but let's just claim they're both leather flasks that you fixed up. Now, why do you need to fix them? They're both already vessels. It's not like the cover that needs hollowing out. But the problem is that they don't stand on their own. In order for something to be considered a vessel for netilat yadayim, it has to be stable. That it could stand on its own. And usually these leather flasks were not really, like you would carry them on your back. They weren't flat. So you would have to flatten them out and make them able to stand on their own. Notlim mehen liyadayim. You could then use them. However, sak v'kupa, a bag, right, like a sack. Okay, this isn't a bag like a bag you and I, but often they were made with goat hairs, or a kupa, which is some sort of box or basket. They can't be used. Why not? Even though you could put things in them, they're not meant for liquids in general. And since they're not meant for liquids, as I mentioned before, so you can't use them for netilat yadayim. Now they ask another question, which is an age-old question. You're stuck in a place you don't have water. So, you're not supposed to touch the bread. So what's a good solution? Well, let's see. Can you hold it in a napkin and not touch the bread? Now, the obvious problem is, let's say you don't touch the bread, but maybe you'll come to touch the bread while you're eating. You'll forget. Right? We forget all the time, and we're just used to touching the bread. So, michashin and dilmanago, lo. Are we worried that maybe you'll touch it or not? First attempt to answer the question, Tashma, ukashinatnulo, the Rabbi Tzadok, ocha p'chomi kibetza. This is a mission that has to do with sukkah. They brought Rabbi Tzadok food that was less than a kibetza, less than an egg bulk. In the sukkah, what did he do? Or on the holiday of Sukkot, he did three things. Notlo b'mapa, we saw him do this. He was holding it with a napkin or a cloth. So he didn't touch it, which makes it sound like he didn't wash and ate it with this mapa. Ochlo chutz l'sukkah, he ate it outside the sukkah because it wasn't enough to require eating in a sukkah. And ein mevarech acharav, and he didn't make a bracha after. He didn't make a bracha achrona, okay, the bracha after eating. So my lav hakibetza nitbai netilat yadayim. Now, doesn't this make it sound like he didn't? Now, he was able to eat it with a mapa only because it was less than a betza. But if it was as big as an olive bulk, which is already a more important requisite amount, it sounds like you would need to wash, and then you can't use this cloth at all. You can't use this trick unless it's not really even an important amount of food. But the Gemara rejects this and says, no. Dilma ha-kebetza by suku, by bracha. There were three issues here. Maybe the kebetza issue was more of an issue for requiring sukkah and for requiring a bracha achrona. If you'd eaten a kebetza, you would have had to sit in the sukkah. If you had eaten a kebetza, you would have had to make a bracha after eating, but not having related to the issue of the mapa. Okay, maybe the mapa you didn't need either which way. So this sugya could lead you to either which way, and we're not sure. So Tashma, they're going to quote another source. The Shmuel eshkachel Rav de ka'achel b'mapa. Shmuel happened upon Rav, and Rav was eating with a napkin around his food. And Shmuel saw him and said, turning now to Amabet, Avdin Kedain, is that how you do things? What, you don't wash? Amar Le, so Rav said, fascinating discussion, right? You have to be careful what you say to a big rabbi, right? Shmuel is sort of suspecting him. What, did you not wash? Amar Le, Da'atik tzara alai. He says, I'm an istinus, meaning I can't deal with touching food. I don't ever touch my food, okay? But obviously I washed. The reason I'm eating it with this cloth is because I don't want to touch the food, because I don't like to touch food. It has nothing to do with washing or not. Now, by the way, you might remember, Rav said you could also wash in the morning. So it could be Shmuel didn't see him wash either because Shmuel wasn't there before he started eating, or maybe because Rav did what he claimed you could do, which is make the bracha in the morning. But either which way, basically Rav is saying you misunderstood the situation. Kiselik Rabbi Zera, so now it seems like you actually do need to wash from this. And in fact, the story continues because when Rabbi Zera went to Israel, Ashkachtinu leRabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi to ka'achle b'vle'e chamatot. He saw Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, who took these flasks, the leather flasks that we talked about, and he took like worn away ones, so like pieces of leather, and he was holding his bread with them. Okay, they were holding, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were holding their bread with it. Rabbi Zera sees this, he says, Amar, Treg Aviravare, Kavataichu, two great rabbis like you, Lidu b'deravu Shmuel. Did you get confused about this conversation that Rav and Shmuel had? Hadatik tzara kamar. Rav said it was only because I'm an istinis, I'm careful, I don't like to touch my food. But what are you doing? What, did you not wash? Did you misread that story? Did you misunderstand it and think that Rav really didn't wash his hands? Okay, and he's kind of horrified by these rabbis. You have to remember, Rabbi Zera, it says Kiselik when he got to Israel. He sees the rabbis in Israel. He's like, what? Did you get confused about some basic halacha? Misunderstand the story? But, again, this is careful not to suspect people. Ishtemitite, when Rabbi Zera reacted in that way, he forgot Hada Amar Rav Tachlifa bar Avimi Amar Shmuel. He forgot this statement that Rav Tachlifa bar Avimi said in the name of Shmuel. Hitiru mapala ochle truma and Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi Kohanim havu. Now we're going to learn something I wanted to read to the end, so we'll start there. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were Kohanim. And Shmuel said, Kohanim who eat truma can actually eat with a mapah. They don't have to wash their hands. Why? Okay, he wasn't misreading the situation. He just forgot a halacha. Because they eat truma. And if you eat truma, you're obviously going to be very careful. You have to remember, all these other people who are washing hands are washing for Chullin, which doesn't even really need netilat yadayim, right? We instituted it so that Kohanim won't get confused and all that. But we assume the Kohanim who are actually eating truma, they're going to be very careful about not touching their food if they didn't wash their hands. So we allow it for those who eat truma. Now here's an interesting debate among the commentaries. Is it only for eating truma? Or is it, since they eat truma, they're careful in general, and then we can even allow them when they're eating non-truma foods? So there's a debate about that among the commentaries. Either which way, you could say either they were eating truma or they were eating other things, and they didn't need to because they were kohanim. So in the end, we don't really have a conclusion about this, although it does seem to say that you can't really hold it in a mapah and eat. Okay? Now they ask another question. Ochel machmat ma'achil tzarich netilat yadayim? Although, what if somebody feeds you and you don't actually touch the food? Okay, we're going to have two questions. One is, does the person eating need to wash their hands? Because they're not, forget about, it's in a mapah, right? Here you're not even touching anything. Or we're going to ask later, what about the person who feeds you? Do they need to wash their hands? On the one hand, they're touching the food. On the other hand, they're not eating it. So, right, and remember, this is just a rabbinic institution that someone who eats food should wash. So it doesn't necessarily mean that someone who touches it needs to wash if they're not eating it. So tashma. So first we're going to talk about the person who's eating it. If they're not touching it, do they need to wash their hands? Again, the concern would be maybe they will touch it at some point. So let's try to learn from here. Tashma, de Rav Huna bar Schora havakai kamei de Rav Hamnuna. So Rav Huna bar Schora was standing before Rav Hamnuna. Balam le umtza va'achil. He put meat into Rav Hamnuna's mouth, apparently with bread, otherwise there's no question here, and Rav Hamnuna ate it. Amar le, and Rav Huna bar Schora said to him as he was feeding him, Ilav de Rav Hamnuna lo sfina lach. If you weren't Rav Hamnuna, you wouldn't be able to get away with this. You would have to wash your hands. My time, lav mishum desire velo naga. What does it mean because you're Rav Hamnuna? Must be because he's careful and I'm not worried you're going to touch. So if we can be sure, or it would be likely that someone would be careful not to touch it, it seems like you'd be able to do it. And not touch it. Not wash before, since you're not touching it anyway. To which they said, "Lo, deser is kadimu mashayademi yikar." No, he must have been your Rav Hamnuna. You must have made sure to wash your hands before, and that's why I can feed this to you. Okay, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't wash his hands. Tashma, second attempt. To Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav. Lo yitain. Now we're going to see all these laws about a shamash. This is a person who's serving, like a waiter at a table. Okay, or more like a butler in a house. Okay, and you have guests over. Lo yitain. So there's all these rules about the shamash when he's serving people at the table. Lo yitain adam prusa letoch piv shel shamash. If you're a guest at the table, don't put, or you're anybody there, don't put a piece of food, a piece of bread in the mouth of the shamash unless you know that he washed his hands. So here it seems like the shamash is not touching the food, and yet he needs to wash his hands, right? Someone else is feeding him. So that would be a perfect answer to the question. Now, before we get to rejecting this answer, we're going to have some other things in the Braita about, in the statement of Rav Zera Amarav, statement of Rav about shamashim. Hashamash mevarech al kol kos v'kos. The shamash has to make a new bracha on every cup of wine he gets, because every cup of wine he gets, he assumes this is his last, and he doesn't know that he's getting any more wine because they don't really serve the shamash so much. They're the hired help. So once he gets a cup and he finishes it, and then they offer him another cup, we assume he has what's called haseh hadat. He already said, I'm not going to have any more, so he moved on. Ve'ino mevarech al kol prusa prusa. But when it comes to bread, once he eats one piece, he doesn't have to make a bracha every time he eats more bread, because he can assume that he's going to get more bread throughout the meal. Because usually the bread they gave them plenty of, just not the wine. But Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Amar mevarech al kol prusa prusa. He actually makes a bracha on every single piece of bread, because even the bread, he doesn't know if they're going to give him any more. Amar Rav Papa. So now Rav Papa says, Bishlama de Rav Rabbi Yochanan lo kashya. Okay, listen. Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, he says, don't actually disagree. Hadika adam chashuv, hadaleka adam chashuv. They were each talking about different scenarios when you have a butler. One is when he's serving and there's a prominent person there. Okay, prominent person could either mean wealthy person or prominent in that way that they're going to have a lot of food, and then there's no concern that he's not going to get more bread, the butler, and therefore, when there's a lot of food, the butler definitely gets more food. So that could be one, and that's Rav who says you don't have to make a new bracha on each one. And Rabbi Yochanan was talking about when there isn't a prominent person. Some people say when there's a Talmid Chacham at the table. The assumption is Talmid Chacham is a person of values, and they'll make sure that the butler gets enough food. So when there's a Talmid Chacham there, for sure the butler knows more food will be coming, because the Talmid Chacham will insist that the host make sure the butler eats well. Okay, so two different possibilities. Mikol makom. Now that's the end of Rav's statement. Now let's go back to the important line. Where were we up to? We were trying to figure out if the person who gets fed needs to wash their hands, and they said here the shamash has to wash his hands. So mikol makom haka'amar elim ken yodeh shenatal yadav. It says here, unless he knows, right? You can only feed the butler if you know they wash their hands. To which they answer, shani shamash de tarid. This is specifically, just like all the other halachot, we're specific for a shamash. Why? Because the shamash is very busy working. They're going to forget to pay attention to not touch the food that somebody put in their mouth. So they might come in contact with the food by accident without paying attention, because they're not really conscious. They're busy focused on their job rather than on their eating. And so that wasn't a good proof. So again, we're left without an answer. Tanu Rabbanan. Lo yitain adam prusa l'shamash. Okay, if we're already talking about the shamash, now they're going another halacha about the shamash. If you're a guest at the table, don't give a piece of bread to the shamash. Ben shakos biado, ben shakos biado shabalabayit. That's whether the shamash is holding a cup of wine in his hand, or whether the balabayit the host is holding a cup of wine in his hand. What's the concern? Shema ye'erab dvar kilkala b'suda. They're worried that what might happen, that the shamash, the owner, the host will get upset that someone's feeding the butler, because maybe he's worried there's not going to be enough food on the table, and the host might get angry. And when the host gets angry, if someone's holding a cup of wine, they're likely to spill it. So whether he'll get angry and he'll spill his own cup, or the butler will see that the host got angry and he'll spill his cup of wine. And that will make a mess, and you should avoid, embarrassing people at the table. And additionally, Hashamash Shalom Natal Yadav, Asur L'Tein Prusa L'Toch Piv. Now we know why we brought this Braita, because this is again a Braita saying the shamash that didn't wash his hands can't be given a prusa, right? You can't put a piece of bread in his mouth. Okay. now that was the first question. We didn't really have an answer. In the end, we're going to see a hilchata what the halacha is. So even though they didn't really answer the question in the Gemara, there will be a point where the Gemara says, look, this is the halacha. But they're going to say about both. So let's go to the second question. What about the person feeding? Does the feeder need to wash their hands before they touch the bread? Tashma, let's learn from here. Detane de Menashe, the house of Menashe had this braita. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omel, Isha medichat yada achat b'mayim, v'notenet pat lebena katam. We're talking about on Yom Kippur. You're not supposed to wash your hands. But a woman who needs to feed her child is allowed to wash one hand and give bread to her younger son. Which looks like it's important to wash your hands if you're feeding someone else. She's obviously not eating herself. And in fact, Amru alav al Shammai hazaken shelo ratza lahachil biyado echat v'gazru alav sheachil b'shtei yadav. They said about Shammai hazaken, the elder, that right, the Shammai, right, Beit Shammai is his students, but the Shammai, that he didn't want to feed his child on Yom Kippur with one hand, and they forced him to wash both hands and feed with both hands. Okay, they wanted to make a point that we don't do like you. Okay, you're very strict. By the way, there's a very famous sugya of Beit Shammai that he wanted to have the children keep Yom Kippur, and they also forced it to feed the children. This sounds similar. It almost sounds like maybe they're two versions of the same story. It was either he didn't want to feed them because he didn't want to touch the bread, or he didn't want to feed them because he wanted them to fast. Okay, either way, you see this attempt of Shammai to be very stringent, and the rabbis wouldn't allow for it and insisted because they didn't want people to learn from here that they would mimic him. They didn't want that to happen. Anyway, what do you see? It looks like you have to wash your hands. But Amar Abaye hata mishum shivta. That's something else. That's because of some evil spirit called shivta, which is a problem. And because of that, we made sure you wash your hands. Now, what is shivta? So Rashi claims this is why we wash our hands in the morning. First washing of the morning is to get rid of this evil spirit that rests on our hands during the day, okay, and during the night. And therefore, on Yom Kippur, if you don't wash your hands in the morning, which we actually do, but if you don't wash your hands in the morning, then you're going to have this shivta on you and you have to get rid of it. Okay, but Tosfot, basically Rabbeinu Tam, disagrees with this. And in Tosfot, Hata Mishum Shivta, he says, even without giving bread, he says we wash our hands in the morning on Yom Kippur. So it can't be that, he says that's like dirt. Getting off that evil spirit in the morning is like dirt, and that's why we're allowed to wash the Tila Yadayim in the morning. So that can't be the issue, and he basically quotes Rabbeinu Hananel, who says this must be some other evil spirit, and it's an evil spirit that lurks in the food of young children and causes them to choke. Which is fascinating because what obviously happened here, the rabbis saw that lots of children choke on food, which we all know that's why, they tell you when you're baby, they say until 4 or 5, which is great because like people always say cut the grapes of kids until they're 4 or 5 because they could still choke on them. And basically kids choked when they were young and they figured there must be some evil spirit that's killing these children who were choking, right? Didn't have the Heimlich maneuver in those days, right? Didn't know how to save a choking baby, okay, although Heimlich is a little dangerous on young children, but putting that whole thing aside, so this was happening a lot, and they basically said this must be an evil spirit. The interesting part about Tosfot is Tosfot claims, because I guess he doesn't have the, he said, I don't know what evil spirits they're talking about, right? And not that he says, I don't know, but he says the fact that we don't do this anymore, we don't wash our hands before we feed children, he says, is because we don't have that evil spirit. Okay, he says there are other ones that we're careful about, like drinking in pairs and giloi, like the snakes, about putting the venom. He says, but this we don't have. Okay, we don't have this one anymore. Again, not that children didn't choke in his day. I'm sure they did, but they didn't view it as an evil spirit. Okay, so anyway, that whole issue of the Netilat Yadayim and Yom Kippur is a completely irrelevant discussion here because it has nothing to do with washing for Chullin like we've been talking about. Okay, Tashma, another attempt. Here's another great story. So Shmuel's father finds Shmuel crying. We're not talking about when he was a grown-up. He was a kid, maybe a teenager. He sees his son crying. He says, why are you crying? Dimachyan Rabbi. Shmuel says, my rabbi beat me up. Right, which we know, unfortunately, people used to get beaten, right, when they didn't do things right. Well, let's see what happened. What did you do wrong? Or what happened? The father asked. Amarli, kasafet liberai, de amarli, so he said, my teacher said to me, kasafet liberai velo mashayade, you fed my son and you didn't wash your hands. And that's why I assume he was like a teenager or a babysitter or something like that, or maybe a 10-year-old, and he fed the little kid and didn't wash his hands. and he hit him for it. So Amai lo mashita. So the father says, why didn't you wash your hands? Amar le, hu achil va'ana mashina? He said, well, he was eating, not me. He was eating, I have to wash my hands? Amar le, lo mastea de lo gamir. So Shmuel's father says, bad enough that this rabbi doesn't know his stuff, because you're right, you don't need to wash your hands. You're not the one eating. Mim chanami machi, and then not only does he not know his stuff, but then he beat you? What a miserable rabbi. V'hilchata, okay, end of story. V'hilchata, the halacha is, ochel machmat ma'achil tzarich netila yadayim, ma'achil eno tzarich netila yadayim. If you get fed, you have to wash, because the food's in your mouth and you might come to touch it. But if you feed someone else, the obligation of the netila yadayim is not upon you. Okay, with that we start with the next Mishnah. Tzorev adam basaru gvina b'mitpachad echad. You can wrap your milk and cheese in the same package. Okay, you can put it together and put it in your shopping bag. Okay, in Israel there's some shopping you might ever notice, I don't know, but if you're in a supermarket, they don't always package up your stuff, but in the supermarkets where they do, some people are careful to not make sure your milk and your meat is in a different bag. They won't put it together. Okay, that's what it seems to be saying here. Now, this says you could put them in together. Okay, but they can't be touching. So the Mishnah actually doesn't seem to have a problem with it, but people are careful about it. I think people in general just try to keep milk and meat away from each other. And nowadays, especially, everything's wrapped. You're not going to have cheese open and a piece of meat open, uncovered, that we actually touch each other. Okay, here they say that they just can't be touching. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, shnei achsaneim ochlim al shulchan echad, ze basar v'ze gvina ve'en choshashim. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says two people in an inn. Okay, you're at like a sit and eat your own thing, like you're in a shopping mall, and there's Kentucky Fried Chicken, and there's right in Israel that's kosher, or it used to be at some point. And you have the ice cream place, and I can eat my ice cream and you can have your chicken. Okay, that can happen next to each other. Now, so it says here we can eat next to each other. Okay, because we don't. The idea is that we're both inns we're both at this inn, okay, at a hotel or whatever it might be in the mall, but we don't have anything to do with each other, so there's no concern our food's going to get mixed in. Now, the Mishnah doesn't say that exactly, but the Gemara will say we're only talking about people who don't know each other. But it does seem pretty clear that we're shnei achsaneim, we both came from different places, and we're just sitting there together. To which the Gemara asks on the first part of the Mishnah, so what if the milk and cheese touch each other? It's sonin, but sonin, it's cold and cold. We're only worried about mixing milk and meat and cooking them together. So Amar Abaye, need to kleep a lo bayna. You might not need to cut off a layer, let's say, because it's not going to really go in, but hadacha milo baye, but of course it would require, does it not require rinsing? If your cheese touches the meat, of course we're going to want to rinse it off in case there's anything left when I do go cook the meat. So now we're going to that line in the Mishnah. Amar Rav Chanan bar Ami Amar Shmuel lo shanu ela she'ein mikirin ze et ze. It's only if they don't know each other, as I said. Avam mikirin ze et ze asur. But if they know each other, then it's forbidden. Tanya namihach. Here's a brighter to support. Rav Shimon Gamliel omer shnei achsaneim shenit'archu lepundak echad. If there were two people, okay, here's a brighter saying the same thing. Shimon Gamliel says if there were two people who came to this inn, one from the that one came from the north, that one came from the south, so they obviously don't know each other. This one came with this piece of meat, that one came with this piece of cheese. Okay, they can eat at the same table, there's no concern. They only forbade it if they were wrapped up together. The Gemara says, wait, only if they're wrapped up together? No, we mean if they're next to each other, like packaged together, where they theoretically could get mixed in. Okay, now. Amar le Rav Yemer bar Shlem yala Abaye. Shnei achim, this is great. Shnei achim, two brothers, umakpidim zal zema. What if they're both angry at each other? They know each other, but they're angry. Now, when brothers get angry, they are definitely not sharing their food. Right? They get very angry, more angry than the average person might get angry at someone else. Often, not always. But Amar le, at least for that moment, right? They're no way going to share. Amar le yomru kol asrikin asurin usurike baitus mutarin. So they quote this famous line. They're going to say what are srikin? Srikin were these cakes they made of that were unleavened, but they would make shapes like pictures on them. Okay, some sort of cake where they would make some image on it, and because it was made of matzah, or it was supposed to be unleavened, but by the time they did the shapes on them, it would usually leaven. But the baitus, the family of the baitusim, they were some fancy bakers or something. They were very good at it, and they would do it really fast. Okay, like in my house, my daughter could bake way faster than the rest of us. One of my daughters, right? Like it takes me 20 minutes to make a batch, that she could whip up in 2 minutes. So they would know how to do it without it leavening. So but the rabbi said, what we're going to say that the baitusim can make these, but nobody else can, that's going to make a lot of confusion. You can't have a system of law where some people can do something and other people can't. So if these two brothers happen to be fighting, what we're going to say, you can put your meat and cheese on the table together, but no one else can? To which they respond, but what about the statement that was quoted by Rabbi Asi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? You're not supposed to wash your clothes on Chol HaMoed, but if you only have one garment, you can. So what? Yomru, you're going to say the same thing. What? This person can wash his clothes, but the rest of us can't? By the way, they wash their clothes by the river. Everybody would see. So they say, we'll just finish this up. Amar Rav Ashi ezulo mochiach alav. Rav Ashi said his belt proves it, because everybody would usually take off their shirt or their cloak and keep their belt for their necks. They only have one belt. So they would use their belt for the next garment. But if they only have one garment and they were washing it, then they would wash it with the belt. So if everybody sees him washing with the belt, they would know that he was washing it, because that's the only garment this person has. And then it would be obvious. And then when it's obvious, you don't need to say that. But when it's not obvious, it's more of an issue, and you can't start making these distinctions. Okay, with that we end. So what? And we got to the next Mishnah. So we started with all these laws of netilat yadayim. Could you wash once for the whole day? Could you wash, especially, is it only in a shatet chak if you really have not a lot of water, like the people who live in that place with the arava, or not? We saw that you need a vessel. You can't do it from in this ditch. You need koach adam. You need like a person pouring the water. If it's attached to a mikveh, though, then theoretically you can say you can dip your hands in it, and that can work. You need a vessel. You need it to look like water, not just colored. You need a certain amount, a requisite amount of a ravit, or maybe just leftover ravit if you're the second person. Then what if you can use a mapah? If you can't have water, can you just not touch the bread? We really weren't able to conclude so much that was okay. Then we had what if someone feeds you? What if you feed someone else? Who needs to wash? In the end, we said the person who's eating needs to, just in case they touch the food, but the person who's feeding doesn't need to, because that it's not a requirement on someone who isn't eating. And then we moved to the Mishnah about you could put the milk and cheese together in certain circumstances. After we said in the first Mishnah you can't, then it said, well, if they're two people who don't know each other, or if they're in a bag and they're not right and they're not touching each other, as long as they're not touching, it's fine. Okay, and then we ended with the issue of these two brothers fighting, and maybe they could be together, but then that would start drawing lines in different places for different people, and that gets very complicated. With that, we finish today's daf. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.